This evening, is there an opportunity for planning board members to ask questions of the applicant?
Yes. Yes, what we do first is they will give the presentation of what's been gathered, what we have here now, and then the planning board gets first shot at them, and then we open it up to the public for their questions and what they wish to bring up. So we'll work it that way. What I'm going to ask you all to do is, you please come up to the microphone and identify yourself when you do come up to speak. We need to have a record of everything here. When we get to that portion, we've received a number of letters, and I'll read the names off of the people we received letters from. They're all on file here. You're welcome to read any of them. Everything that we have, everything we've seen is on file, and you're welcome to see and review any of it. I'm not going to read all the letters, but if someone wrote a letter and I call their name, if they wish to read the letter into the record, they certainly can. It's in the record. It has been submitted. All the planning board members have seen these except a couple that came in today, which they will see, and so they are aware of what has been sent in. So, who is representing Hudson Solar care to come up?
Hold it.
Hold it? Hold what?
I would suggest you, one, read the public notice as it appeared for this meeting, and then secondly, secure documentation that all those requirements have been met.
Okay. Sounds good. I think she's doing that. Are you, I think Gretchen is being so informed. Okay. And,
That includes posting and everything else?
okay, where is the public notice? It's not in the notes. The public notice is that we are reconvening the public hearing tonight on the Hudson Solar application, where you will have the applicant describing the studies that have come in, the results. We will also be discussing any other issues that may have come up, and we will then, the planning board will be asking questions so as they come up, and we will also then open to the public for questions and comment. And we do have our planning board attorney here tonight, so if there are any legal issues that come up, we will have someone who can answer them, because I probably can't. So, without any further ado.
Thanks very much. I'm Susanna Bradley. I work for Hudson Solar. I was a former engineer for them, and then worked in international business, and then came back to Hudson Valley to start my family, and now work for them again. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our project tonight, along with Nate Suppmeyer, who is our engineering manager and is also a born and raised Hudson Valleyan. So we're here to present some additional studies which the board has requested to support our special use permit application and our site approval plan for a 1.8 acre solar farm at 355 Wurtemberg Road. Just a couple of notes before we dig into the studies. The zoning enforcement officer has already determined this project meets zoning law, such as the lot coverage requirements, and it's already received utility approval as well. Rhinebeck solar zoning law was also recently challenged, but that has been upheld by the Dutchess County Supreme Court. So the town board has already approved solar farms as permitted use in rural countryside, RC5, which is what this property is zoned in. So the town's already decided that solar is appropriate for this zone. There's also several other uses for RC5 that we wanted to note. Beyond solar, there are things that are permitted in RC5 like cell phone towers and fairgrounds, rod and gun clubs, sawmills, agricultural uses like pig farms and chicken farms, things that have a pretty big impact on their neighborhood. Those are also all permitted for RC5s. Also already existing on Wurtemberg Road, there are several non-residential buildings there already. There's a church, there's a bed and breakfast, there's a horse training and breeding facility. So it's already not a strictly residential neighborhood. Right now, if you look at the site, you see mostly shrubs and trees from pretty much every vantage point. After our installation, you should see pretty much mostly shrubs and trees from every vantage point. And our studies should detail exactly what that will entail. Our third-party studies kind of go into more detail about that. So at the request of the planning board, we had these studies done, and we've also worked with several of the neighbors to make the project more acceptable to them. So we'd like to talk about our studies and also the changes that we've gone through with the neighbors. And to do that, I'm going to bring up Nate Suppmeyer, who's going to bring us through the details.
That's going to be a
That's
little
perfect.
tough to see.
It's small, yeah. It's great for Richard. He's got a great view.
I can't even see from here. I'm blind.
I'm Nate Suppmeyer, Engineering Manager at Hudson Solar. Here to present the studies that were requested by the Planning Board. I'd like to start off, I don't know if we have no slides, so I want to start off with the Conservation Advisory Board of Rhinebeck had already approved this project. State Historic Parks and Preservations also ruled that this would have no impact. So from there, we jump into the DC spill incident search, which basic search will show that there is no evidence of any reported spills near the site. The only reported spill that we could find based on the search was in 1999 at 9 Wurtemberg Road, and no spills were reported at the site, that was brought up in a prior meeting. A phase 1 archaeological study was done by Hudson Valley Cultural Resource Consultants, and that basically was an easy determination from them that the pressing of posts and the necessary trenching isn't viewed as archaeologically sensitive, and it has a low historic potential. I think the state Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation kind of went along with that and also agreed, ruling that it would have no impact on cultural resources. They also ruled that no further archaeological investigations are recommended. The next study that was done was a visual impact analysis. That was performed by Saratoga Associates by a man named Matthew Allen. I know that George Chains is kind of reviewing that process right now, but I will go through that study. So based on that study, the existing mature deciduous trees and associated undergrowth provide a dense visual barrier into the project site from the adjacent properties to the east and the west. Line of sight profiles and on-site photographs during the worst time of year, I'll make a note of that. We kind of went out there. It's not going to get any worse than this in terms of foliage and leaves on the trees. So we went out there and he did analysis during the worst time of the year to demonstrate that the project will be substantially or fully screened from 33 Frost Road, 61 to 63 Frost Road, 371 to 381 Wurtemberg Road, and 376 Wurtemberg Road. He created line of sight profiles and on-site photographs to indicate potential visibility through existing vegetation from portions of 43 Frost Road, which is the property of Nicholas and Contrara, and 340 Wurtemberg Road, which is the bed and breakfast kind of to the northwest, as well as the Phil Coretti property north of the site. Nicholas and Cartier was very helpful in working with us to be able to visit the site with Matthew Allen to determine any vantage points that were of concern to him, so that way we could address those. We did reach out to Phil Coretti, and he declined to allow us on his property with Matthew Allen. So we performed analysis based on information that we had and photographs that we could take without going on his property. For 43 Frost Road, which is the Nicholas and Contreras site, this parcel is approximately 250 feet from the array footprint and 360 feet from his house. We met him on site and discussed the potential visibility from the areas of concern to him. Ground vantage points have near complete visual screen from the existing vegetation, so there was ruled not to really need anything from any vantage point from the ground. Those are shown in Figure 2, 11, and 12 of the study that you have. The backyard deck was also a source of concern to him, and that was ruled that just like the ground, there was nothing that was going to be able to be seen based through the existing vegetation. So the only planned screening is really from the second floor window, which was another source of concern for him. So we went up, he took pictures from there, and he developed a line of sight profile from that, which was Figure 15. The project plan includes planting 7 8 to 10 foot tall white pines to minimize the visibility of the array from that window in line with the second story window. That is Figure 15, and it is shown with 5 years of growth. The 340 Wurtemberg Road site, which is the old Rhinebeck Inn bed and breakfast, and the Coretti property, the footprint of the array is approximately 775 feet southeast of the bed and breakfast. The existing hedgerow along the property line separates the project site from them. The project plan includes planting of 17 8 to 10 foot tall white pines along the northwest corner of the array to minimize the impact from parcels north of the array, both of those parcels. Those are shown in Figure 3, 16, and 17. His conclusion was, given the limited degree of off-site visibility, the potential visual impact of the proposed solar project is minor. The sixth study was the biodiversity assessment, and that was performed by Eric Kiviat, PhD at Hudsonia, who is also a Bard professor. He didn't make any real conclusions in his study in terms of offering this is what needs to be done. He kind of assessed the impacts and the comments that were made in previous public hearings, and I'll go through some of those results that he had mentioned in his study. The perimeter fence that you all know about is designed to go around the array. We've talked to him about how we can design that in a way to allow the biodiversity of the area to continue to thrive. And we've agreed with him to kind of design holes large enough in the bottom for amphibians and turtles and reptiles and other animals to be able to pass through the array area without any interruption. He mentioned that the amphibians prefer the woods and the pools anyway, so he didn't think there would be much of that as an issue. In the mention of Blanding's turtles, which was brought up at a prior meeting, he said there's no need to do something special about them, as the maps within the report note the core habitats are far away up to the northeast and to the southwest across 9G, with no known populations within 1,000 meters. He also recommends that the brush and trees cleared from the array area, instead of being mulched up, are piled up and used as screening and a habitat for shrubland life and other critters who like to use that kind of area as a home. We did mention to him that our plan is now to put pollinator-friendly plants within the array to use on otherwise unusable space for monarch butterflies and other bees and other pollinator-friendly species to kind of thrive within the array area in a space that would otherwise not be used. So he gave us some feedback on that, and we are still working with him to establish a solid list of native plants, which was one of his recommendations, was to not use non-native plants. And we're working with him, Fresh Energy Co. out of Minnesota, which has done a lot with pollinator-friendly solar arrays, as well as the Hudson Valley Seed Company to supply us with those. He says it would be better to have the array slightly higher from grade to allow for plant growth, but as we know, there's also a screening issue with this, so we told him we want to keep it kind of where it is, and we will do our best to focus on the plant species that can thrive given the height that they have to work with. Mowing should occur only during non-growing seasons, he mentions, which is our plan, and we will do that twice a year, both during the non-growing seasons. The last study was a sound and noise study, which was done by Morris Associates, which as well basically ruled that it's not an issue. The potential worst case scenario of sound with all the inverters on is 31.9 dBA, and that is 14.8 dBA greater than the measured daytime ambient value of 46.6, which was measured there on site. So they will produce less at the maximum of all inverters operating at the same time will produce less than the ambient noise in the daytime. And as we all know, solar is only operating during the day, so you don't really need to worry about noise at night from the thing. The analysis also assumed that there was direct path for the sound with no obstructions, which we all know is not the case. The arrays will be obstructing the sound, the screening will be obstructing the sound, and the existing vegetation will be obstructing that sound. They basically ruled that if you're standing at a property line, it would be a soft whisper is what the most you would hear with all the inverters operating at once. In conjunction with the noise study, 2 members of the planning board and Phil Karate went to Rhinebeck Equine, which is another install of ours in Rhinebeck, to witness the sound of the inverters there. The sound was very negligible compared to what you were hearing at 9G. And I think that kind of brought to light a lot of the concerns about the sound and a real world example of how little noise they actually make. So in relation to all these studies, we then modified our site plan to comply with those. As you will see, we have now in the site plan the 7 white pines that are partially obstructing the view from the second-story window of the Nicholas and Contrara property to the south. And we also have 17 white pines to the northwest, which blocks the view from the usable area on the Karate property and the bed and breakfast to the northwest. At the request of the neighbors who we worked with during this time, we also compressed the array and shifted it slightly more towards the center of the property taking it farther away from the south property line. So now it's about 250 feet from the south property line, 155 feet from the east property line, and about 170 feet from the north property line. We removed the berm, which was based on advice by the visual consultant, and it also would have required another special use permit to have the berm there. The only land that will be cleared is within the fence, and we have added a note for the pollinator-friendly plants to be located within the array footprint as well. And that's about it. I don't know if you have any questions based on these studies for me.
Did you have anyone else who wished to present anything on your behalf this evening?
We have other people here who would like to present on our behalf and speak up and
So
support.
that's the public comment period, but your presentation, sort of your official presentation is
Correct.
complete?
Unless there's any questions, my presentation of the summaries of the studies is complete, yes.
Well, I'll turn it over to the planning board members for questions.
I have some questions. On the biodiversity study, Eric Kubiak really did have a number of suggestions throughout his narrative, although he didn't list them at the end of it. And you covered some of them, but there were a few that you did not, so I'd just like to ask about
Sure
them.
thing, yep.
He talked about screening with eastern arborvitae and white pine, as you said, and you made it very clear that for the first years, they will have to be protected from deer.
Yes, at the time, the green giant arborvitae were the planned tree, and we took his proposal and you switched over to white pine instead, which he said was a lot less susceptible to deer eating them.
But even so, he is saying that in both cases, they would need to be protected from deer at the
Correct.
early stage of their growing. So how would that be done?
I don't have that answer for you right now. At this point in time, any tree that you replant that is an evergreen tree is going to have some kind of impact with deer. It's going to get eaten at some level, at least on the lower levels by them. I can get back to you on specific things that we can do to mitigate the deer eating the bottoms of the trees, but I don't have a specific solution for you right now on that.
Okay, one of the other things he mentioned is controlling invasives like multiflora rose, oriental bittersweet, honeysuckle.
Based on that, he also mentioned not using any kind of herbicide as well, which we're not planning to use any herbicide. We're planning on basically clearing the array area and then planting these pollinator-friendly plants, which should thrive in the area and hopefully not allow invasive species to come in. But there's not much we can do in terms of mitigating invasive species. I think they're already existing.
What I think Eric may have had in mind is certain things, if they're not controlled, will climb up your cedar trees and the other trees that you have there and eventually do them harm. So, you know, I don't know if you're talking about manually pulling things out from time to time. There's just the issue of dealing with invasive species in the 16-acre area.
Yeah, we don't have a specific plan for dealing with the invasive species right now. We can work with Eric certainly to develop a plan that he approves of to get rid of them without the use of herbicides and other things he mentions in this article.
Okay, you might ask him what he thinks.
Yep, definitely.
When he's talking about deciduous trees, he mentions that the ash will almost certainly die. And so any ash that you're relying on for screening, you should be keeping in mind that they are going to be dying.
Yep. I would agree.
He suggests doing your construction before the nesting season, I guess as early as possible.
Yeah, in general, I don't know if it's a good idea to set a precedent for any construction site ever to only happen during the winter. Obviously, yes, the ideal time would be during the winter, but I think if you were to set a precedent now that this project has to only be constructed during the winter with the minimal amounts of construction that are necessary for it, then you could set that precedent for any project to happen around Rhinebeck to only be constructed during the winter.
I'm simply going through areas.
Yeah, I completely, I understand.
There's something about the The insertion of broad white stripes between panels, somehow he thinks the panels themselves can be harmful to things like bats because they're reflective and dark colored.
Yeah, we actually had a follow-up conversation with him on the study, and he does mention the risk falls off, but is not zero more than 50 meters from a stream, which we are over 50 meters from a stream on this site. He did reference us to someone else if we want to look into this idea further, but he didn't seem really concerned over our follow-up conversation that this was going to be a major issue.
And then I think the last thing I have here is he suggests mitigation of your use of this scrubland by creating a couple of acres of scrubland habitat offsite.
Yeah, there's no plan to do that right now, but we are working with him to at least reuse portions of that footprint with pollinator-friendly plants. So what was not there, being scrubland right now, will help other species thrive, like monarch butterflies and bees, to help that local population still thrive.
I have another question, but maybe other members of the
Sure.
board.
Eric, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have several questions as well. First of all, it says on the plan to retain the existing cedars. How will that be done? Because, I mean, just general succession, there's oaks growing amongst those cedars. Those oaks will get taller than the cedars will die off. The oak trees will grow tall, and you just see trunks between, and they won't block the way the cedars block. So is this going to be an ongoing process of keeping that succession from happening? Or is this going to be just, oh, fate, we're not going to do anything with the cedars, but they're going to die off in a few years?
The note was more just that we aren't going to touch the existing screening that's there. We're going to allow the existing screening around that
That
footprint.
existing screening might become far less in the future because of the way trees grows. Cedars block the view, oak tree trunks don't. Is that correct?
Yes, and we can certainly look into any visual impact that might have and look at our plan for that.
And if I could just intercede just for a minute, if everyone understands that, assuming if this project were approved, it has to come back in 3 years to be reapproved, and then every 5 years after that. And one of the primary things that we would be looking at is the maintenance of the landscaping and the screening. And if there are any failures there, they have to either be fixed, made right, or we would not reapprove the special use permit.
All right. And in terms of the white pines, why not just install larger pines from the beginning so the deer browsing won't be as big an issue and that they'll just do their job right from the get-go?
I guess the answer for that was we just took the advice from the visual impact consultant, and that was his advice.
Okay. And you said you're going to mow 2 times a year, but not in the non-growing season. Why would there be need to do it twice if it's non-growing season?
We'll mow it once at the very, very end of the summer, and then once right at the beginning of the spring. I mean,
And what kind of growth is going to go on between the end of the summer and the beginning of spring?
there could be minimal growth. We still want to, if we can eliminate any possible growth that happens during that period of time so that the plants can start from as low to the ground as possible, especially with these pollinator-friendly plants. There may be, I'm not a plant expert, but there might be some growth between that time and that time. And if we can make it so the plants are all starting at the lowest possible height come the growing season, that's the plan.
And what is the nature of the fence that's going to be around the?
It's somewhat like a deer fence. It will have larger squares at the bottom that will allow animals to move about without any
A
interruption.
wire mesh
Yep.
fence with
Yep.
what kind of posts?
Either wood posts or metal posts.
Yes, how high?
How high? 6 feet.
6 feet.
Edna?
Yeah, I still don't completely understand who is, if this is approved, will get the permit, and who is responsible for maintaining, to the extent it's going to be maintained, the screening, and how that contractually will happen.
Could I comment, Michael?
Sure. And then I'm going to
Yeah,
ask John.
I'm going to follow up on Edna's comment, Edna's question, and ties into Eric's question too, because I have one principal concern here that I think I'm questioning how you've addressed it. As it's important to screening what physical or legal and/or legal measures have you devised to put in place, entered into agreement on, that will cause the existing and the introduced vegetation to be maintained outside of the lease area?
I don't have those answers for you.
That's the key
right now.
question for the screening of the site.
I've spoke to John Lyons
Do you
about
agree,
that.
Edna?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the, you know,
Yep.
I asked John about that very question today, and basically, I guess the area that's leased for this is what, 1.8 acres, something like that. But there's an easement, I believe, is it in the lease, to allow you to get from Württemberg Road to
To the
the...
site. Yep.
All right, I believe, but John can certainly be more specific on this than I am, that the same process can be used under either a lease, a part of the lease arrangement, easement, or the lease arrangement itself, that those areas that are necessary for screening also have to be maintained by the people leasing the property, that they are an integral part of the project. It would have to be part of, probably better part of the lease than an easement, since easements run with the property, and it might be better with a lease.
should be part of the approved site plan.
Well, it would have to be, but that's what we're doing here now, is to find these things so that we can correct any,
Yep.
shall we say, deficiencies. But
And I
you're
agree, I
absolutely
mean,
right. There has
that's-
to be some way to ensure that all the screening that's off-site, by that I mean outside that fencing, is indeed preserved. Otherwise, the necessity, when you come back here in 3 years or in 5 years, that you will not be in a position to consider reapproval of a special use permit.
I understand.
Nor should we be waiting 5 years.
Right.
If they die next month. But it's not really an easement. The easement allows them to go over to those trees, to water them.
Yeah,
and
it's more of a
pull some lines
requirement
up.
of
It's gonna be a
maintaining
deed
property.
restriction.
No, that would be in the lease, because it's not a deed. There's no subdivision going on here. It's a lease to Hudson Solar to put this
But a
in,
lease-
so it would have to be part of the
But
lease.
what happens if the lease, someone else takes the lease over? They're bound by this lease to have access to take care of the trees?
We're gonna have to figure out a mechanism whereby every element of the project that's on the ground, okay, is under the control of the applicant, all right? And I think that that's probably, in this case, gonna involve an amendment of the lease to increase the ground space that's being leased to include every place on the property where there are going to be components of the project. I think that's the way to resolve that.
Agreed.
And
So-
are we now saying the applicant is Solar Hudson, or is the applicant Mr. Sherrod?
Well, who's gonna operate the facility?
We are.
Hudson Solar.
Hudson Solar is the applicant
Right,
then.
and they're the lease, they're
So-
leasing
The
the
lessee.
property from the
What happens
property
if they go out of business?
Well, if they go out of business, and if a special permit is not actively implemented for more than a year, the special permit expires, the ability to run the facility expires, and the town then has to be in a position to have some sort of a decommissioning or some sort of a way to deal with that.
I know what I think Eric is after is that, so the conditions that would apply to the operation of this facility have to be drafted in the site plan approval in such a way, and most site plan approvals, so that if someone else comes in and takes over the facility from Hudson Solar, either they sell it or they go belly up, they have to comply with the same, as a condition of being allowed to use the facility, they have to comply with all the conditions that have been placed on the approval by the planning board.
And where'd all the people then who bought panels go for recourse on this if Hudson goes out of business?
That's the problem.
And nobody, what if it doesn't make the money that they were hoping it would? They go out of business, and then everybody's got these panels that, what are they gonna do with them?
Well, we're just talking about this farm, right?
Right.
Who's, I guess I'm not.
The people who buy
The
into the
people who buy the
community
panels
solar.
on this farm.
Got it. Oh, I'm not sure what the structure is. That'll be up to them and whatever their relationship with Hudson Solar is.
So it could happen that it goes out of business and nobody wants to touch it, then who does the removal of all this?
Well, that's an issue that you should take a look at. That's probably something that should be addressed as part of site plan approval. It's very often the case that with certain facilities, for instance, with cell towers, using that as an example, there are often provisions that are placed in the approval to govern what happens after the tower has finished its useful life, or for some reason it's not being used, to assure that it's going to be removed from the site.
There was a number put in for that, but being that none of these plants have been decommissioned, it's like decommissioning a nuclear plant at this point. We don't know what it's going to cost. So
You don't, but I think that.
we don't know if
my
anybody's going to
suggestion-
accept the waste from these.
Well, that's not going to really be our issue. Our issue is going to be that it's going to have to be removed from the site.
Well, when you remove it, you have to put it somewhere.
Yes.
If nobody's going to accept it, then that
Well,
becomes our
your
issue.
authority as a planning board only extends to certain things, okay? And regulation of the use of the land is where that is. You know, you can put in that it has to be properly disposed of, but you're starting to edge off of your area of jurisdiction.
Other questions by planning board members?
And I do want to make a quick comment that part of the reason why we chose the site was because it was kind of tucked away, and when we are determined to make sure it is screened from people, and that's why we tried to work with the neighbors and Nicholas and Contrara and reached out to Phil Karate to try to establish a means for screening this that was in an accepted way. So we will continue to work with whoever needs to be worked with to develop a screening plan that is approved.
Mr. Sherrod.
I have a couple questions.
Richard?
I hear you say totally screened, nobody's going to see it, but 10 minutes ago, you used the word partially obstructing the view.
Correct. There's
Everybody needs to understand, you can, you will,
See.
and the neighbors will see it.
there are views that are the array will be partially visible, correct?
Yeah.
Why
I
is
don't
that?
quite understand why the visual consultant, and we keep going back to him saying, well, he guided us. He guided us to remove the berm. Berm was a beautiful idea. I understand it costs a lot of money. But the berm completely blocks the view, and it gave us, this was our initial proposal, was a berm or a fence giving us a screening.
Yep.
And even planting on this berm so that you have what looks like natural vegetation and bushes and everything. But not only was that eliminated, because that's more expensive than a fence, but the fence is no screening fence. A deer fence, 6-foot wire fence is not an attractive thing. And it's certainly not a screening.
I'm not sure of a screening fence that was in any of the prior plans. I know the berm was in the prior plans.
It was talked about,
It
certainly.
was talked
It was,
about.
yeah, it was talked about, but I don't think it was ever shown in any plan. I mean, the berm was something that we just took the advice on the visual impact consultant. So he said that based on ground visibility and what you can see from the ground and even his deck, there wasn't going to be any impact that the berm was going to do. Really, the only visual impact was going to be from that
But
second
he's
floor
also
window.
saying, yeah, you can get away with 8 to 10-foot trees rather than put in large trees. It's cheaper. There's no dispute there. But did the people have to wait 5 years for these trees to get big enough? And
Well,
I
that's
think
what I'm
there should
saying.
be a
Why not
plan.
put in mature trees?
I think there
They're
should
certainly
be a plan
available.
to protect the trees, certainly, and that goes back to the whole site plan. But now, I have and we've never defined this, we have a primary and secondary occupant on this property?
No. No, there is, this
Well,
is
it
the
was
only use.
The verbiage primary in the new law, in our zoning?
You're talking about a co-principal?
Yes, I think that's.
No, in this, that's permitted in the law, but that's not what's happening. This is the only application. There is no co-principal
Okay, so- but we
at this
still-
point in time.
Okay. We have the potential for someone to use the other 13 acres, right?
DeCola was co-principal.
Yeah, but this one isn't.
Yeah, this one, no.
But this, potentially, you could subdivide, it's a 5-acre area, so there are a number of things you could do because of the size of the site.
Right, so
On the
all-
other hand, though, through the lease, in terms of the screening that does get approved, that does have to be protected, particularly if it's vegetation, things like that, obviously, those areas would be off limits to any form of subdivision, anything like that.
So again, so anything that is deemed a screening area becomes a protected area and a deed restriction, actually.
Well, part of the lease, I would say, part of the lease. Because they're not going to own the land, so it's, from a deed standpoint, they're not going to own the land.
So what happens when we subdivide the land? Somebody else comes in and decides they want to put up what they're permitted to a house, and those trees right there are no longer desirable, and they cut them down.
That's the contract that's going to be.
That's going to be part of the lease, and that's going to be one of the legal issues that would have to be faced. I think we would be in a position, having approved this, if we were to do that, and those trees were part of the screening that we required to be there, I think we'd be in a position where we would not permit a subdivision such that those trees could be removed. I mean, there's a certain obligation on us when we do review in 3 and 5 and 5 years, whatever, that sort of thing, that we make sure that the requirements that we place on this at the beginning are maintained.
Well, I think 3 to 5 years, I think that's a very long time.
It is a long
I
time,
think
but at
part
the
of our
same time,
approval should be a yearly.
well, generally what we do require, as I understand it, in site plan, if we require plantings like in parking lots, things like that, we require the applicant, if we approve it, to maintain those shrubs live and well. And if they do die, the zoning enforcement officer is supposed to
Yeah,
go
I'm
in.
not suggesting they come back in front of this board.
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting that
No.
the zoning enforcement officer,
Could go out there once a year anyway and take a look.
Absolutely. That's all very
We can do
simple.
that,
Very
and we can
simple.
certainly do that, and it's not a bad idea. Other questions?
John?
John.
I just want to say something, because I think all these questions are good questions, and they're things that the board needs to be thinking about. And just to put this on your radar screen, just in terms of, as you're moving forward, and Art already knows this, but I think that this issue will, if the board decides to, I mean, we're still early days to be talking about the approvals, because you have to make your determination of significance, okay? But just in terms of understanding tools that are out there, I think that on this particular issue of screening, which is very important to some board members and also to the general public, is for the board to consider a very expanded discussion of screening in the approval, and specifically, depart from sort of bullet lists that sometimes gets used in other approvals, and really have a detailed discussion about what the board's desires are with regard to the screening. Sometimes what we talk about is that, especially for a long-term project, if there comes a time 10 years from now where none of us are around anymore, it's nice for someone to be able to pick up that approval document and be able to read the story of what the board cared about at that time, and to really have a detailed understanding of what you guys wanted to get to. And we can do that. We've done that on other things. So I'm just telling you that that's out there, and I think that this is an issue that, if it came to it, an approval would be suitable for that kind of.
No, I think it's an excellent idea, absolutely.
There's just one further point. I know there's been this discussion of what if somebody were to subdivide the property. You don't even have to go that far to cut off the possibilities. The question can be, what if Mr. Sherrod decided to build a house on the property which would not require any planning board approval at all? So therefore, it's important that the vegetation be protected through the lease or through the board's approvals, if we reach that point, and the lease agreement.
Yeah. And the vegetative screening that would be required here, you really have to think of it, and even though those are living plants, you really have to think of it the same way you think of it as a fence or some other sort of man-made structure, that if somebody, you approved another application and the fence was a required part of the approval, and the person took the fence down, you wouldn't be asking any questions about being able to go in there in an enforcement action to get the fence back up. This vegetative screening isn't any different from that. It's just a different media, that's all.
Just more difficult to reinstall.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
and that's right.
Well, this is one reason we're having George James review this, to see if there are gaps in this visual analysis, if there are gaps in the screening plans. Just have another set of eyes look at it from another point of view, and, help us to come up with what would be the very best possible way of dealing with this.
There are different philosophies about screening and how to accomplish that, and it'll be good for you to get another opinion on it.
Yeah.
So this is going to be maintained through a lease agreement between Barry Sherrod and Hudson Solar. If the lease is broken, what binds us?
The lease itself is going to be the basis, or part of the basis, of the special use permit and site plan approvals we give. And if the conditions of the approvals are violated or go out the window, it becomes a zoning violation, and it has to be treated in that way. And the planning board does have the authority to revoke special use permits through a public hearing process for cause. So if the lease is violated, it becomes a violation of our approvals and the basis of the approval, and then we would then have to take the enforcement action, possibly leading up to a revocation of the special use permit.
Which would mean removal of the field?
Yep.
Which would mean what in terms of that, the contract between the owners of the panels and the...
Well, it's a potential...
Again, not our problem.
The people that invest in this are gonna, they have their own risks that
Yeah.
they'll be assuming to be participating.
But we should make it clear that those risks are possible and real.
It's not really your responsibility to do that, that's the responsibility of the people that are gonna be contracting with.
Well, it's hard to think about all these things when you're thinking, oh, I'm going to go green here, and I'm going to do things good for the planet, and I'm only thinking about those things, and there are these other things that are there that I really think ought to be there.
But they do need to think of those
You have
things.
to remember, you have to stay within the box that is your jurisdiction.
Anything else?
I'd like to say one more thing about the visual analysis. I guess that's, the sound thing, I personally went to one of the sites, I don't think it's noisy enough on 9G. The visual analysis, were there any guidelines that we came up with to say, were the guidelines just take care of these 4 properties? Why didn't we, I know we mentioned things like, can you see it from Burger Hill? I personally said, you can see this land from Mountain View Road. Did we provide any guidelines, and are we providing guidelines to our person who's going to review?
Basically, I think what he's doing, George Janes, is generally what he would do as a review for a site like this within a certain area. What it is, I don't know. In our zoning law, the only requirements under this are that there be no glare from any adjoining properties or any public highway, any public road, anything like that. And those are the only, I guess those you consider those, well, they're not just guidelines, they're standards that have to be met. Beyond that, no, there is nothing specific other than our normal noticing process of properties within, I think, 300 feet of the project site, things of that sort. It basically follows the same protocols we follow for special use permit and site plan review.
Can I add something to that, Michael? Because with the process that you're engaged in right now, which is the environmental review pursuant to seeker, what you're looking to determine as part of your, when you're making your determination of significance, is whether there is a significant adverse environmental impact presented by the project as it's proposed at this time. So even though you may not have, like your question, Richard, is looking to like a guideline, what your guideline during the seeker process is there going to be a significant adverse environmental impact, and the visual impact of the project is part of that.
Right.
And so those are often different for each project, but that's what you're in the process right now of.
Correct, that's why I'm asking you questions.
Yep.
In a previous application, for instance, we joked about taking a boat out on the Hudson River, and we worried about our neighbors in a whole other county looking at glare. So what kind of glass should we put in there? And those were legitimate questions. I see this as exactly the same thing. If I'm sitting up in my house on Mountain View Road, and I look down and see a whole bunch of panels, I consider that an impact, that's all. And the questions, I just want to make sure those are addressed while we're having someone look at it.
I would think that George Janes, in his review for the planning board, will comment first on the methodology that was employed, and then secondly, will focus on the geographic sufficiency of the area that's been included within the study, and then go from there. But I think the question of that Richard's raising is something that George will be addressing, as to whether the viewing area was broad enough.
And I think based on my experience with George, that if there are
I've had it too.
ideas that he thinks should be introduced into the dialogue, he'll provide them.
Yes.
This is why we asked him to do this for us. Anything else, members of the board?
Not at the moment.
Okay, what I'm going to do before I open it up to the public is I'll just read out the names of letters we've received. If you're here tonight and would like to read your letter, you're certainly welcome to. All of these, as I said, are on file here down in the office, and you're welcome to read any of them. Gretchen's hours are Monday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and you're more than welcome to come down and read any of the documents we have. I'll just read these names quickly. Stephen Plotnick, Kevin Duncan, Tom Finkel, Steve Rosenberg, Marianne Cunningham, Nicholas Wright, Penelope Mort Ranta, Laura and Andrew Sulkind, John McCleary and Carly Graves, Nina Lynch, Lori Husted, Jennifer Crawford, and Barbara and Raina Wan. And let's see, I have a couple others here. Marianne Cunningham, I think I already gave you that one.
If I can make one
Okay,
more.
you have these ones.
If I can make one more recommendation, we would like to invite the vet from Rhinebeck Equine up to share her story on this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
My name's Nina Dybel, and I'm a veterinarian and owner of Rhinebeck Equine. And we have a very, as far as I understand, very similar solar array. The panels are right on the rooftop over where the horses are housed at our clinic, and we've had it for 2 years and have had no detrimental effect on any of the horses, or we never hear it really or anything. And then I just wanted to add too, I think there was some concern, if I understood correctly, that there might be radiation from the solar panels. We have a nuclear scintigraphy unit in our practice where we do nuclear scans on horses, and we regularly monitor radiation on our site since we've had that. I think we put that in 2005 or 2006, and we don't have any increase in background radiation over the last 2 years since we've had those solar panels up on the roof. So,
Thank you.
Question,
Yeah.
you say your array is similar, it's not the same size though, right?
yeah, it powers 2/3 of our energy.
So it's
of our
much
electric-
smaller than the array, and it's not a ground-mounted array, it's a roof-mounted array.
It is a roof-mounted, correct.
So it's only similar in that it uses solar panels, is that correct?
So I actually don't know that much about the project that's being proposed. But as far as I know, they're the same type of panels.
Yes, very, very similar panels. The inverters, the sound that they produce is almost identical to the sound that would be produced from
Okay,
these
so the
inverters.
comparison would just be an oral comparison between the
Correct.
two projects.
And these inverters are actually mounted on the exterior wall of the operating room. And I think more what we're trying to let you guys know is that this has had no adverse effects on their operations within the operating room, within the equine, and the system in large has had just positive impacts for their business.
None of the horses have been rendered
Watch it.
impotent.
Yeah, we know.
That weren't beforehand, yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, what I'm going to do is open it up to the public. What I'm going to ask you to do is come up, speak into the microphone, identify who you are, just so that... Address to, so that Gretchen keep an accurate record of this. I ask you very strongly, please be respectful of your neighbors. We're going to have differences of opinions here, but we all live in this community together, and we're all going to have to be here tomorrow. So there are issues here that are legitimate, but personal attack, things of that sort, really, they're beneath Rhinebeck. So please be, on target with what you're saying. I'm sure you have a lot of good things to say, but please remember, we are all neighbors here, and we live in the same community. Okay.
In the spirit of that, it's nice to see you all. Keep past one of those down. So Amanda Miller, 329 Wurtemberg Road. You all know me. So I just want to address some points that I think Nate and his colleague mentioned. The first presenter from Hudson Solar brought up the fact that there's a church and a horse farm in our neighborhood, and therefore it's not entirely residential. Susan Sheridan lives in the home that's on the horse farm. She rescues old horses that no one wants anymore, and I'm not the most religious person in the world, but as far as I can tell, churches are most of the time in residential neighborhoods because that's where the people who go to them live. So I see both of those things as positives, and I think my neighbors feel the same way. And part of the reason why we don't agree with this plant is because it's going to be right next to the church. There was a comment about the DEC spills. from what I can tell from the pastor, this was one of those things that was not necessarily reported to the DEC. All you have to look at, and I've never been on the property, but I've walked along Phil Crotty's property line, and all you have to do is look at the amount of trash that is on that property. I'm talking about piles of tires, stacks of sheet metal, to know that there was something that happened there. And what that means for you all, I don't know. Maybe that's as far as it goes because no one reported it. But the pastor, again, did say that he had to bury his well. This was, I think, before he became pastor there, and I think he became pastor there in 1994-ish. I could have that wrong, but it was before he became pastor there. And so they had to bury the well a lot further down than I guess you'd normally have to. There's another comment about the foliage will not get worse than it is. That was true up until, I think, last Friday. There are so many trees down. It looks like Rhinebeck got carpet bombed. I know we had tons of trees down in our forest, which don't really affect us because they're not necessarily near us, but we had a huge hemlock tree fall right out from the ground into our backyard. And speaking of ash, there's a large ash tree right at the beginning of my driveway that actually currently provides screening from, I think, Wurtemberg Road to the property in question, and definitely from my property to the property in question. And that tree has been decimated by this last storm, and I thought we could try to keep it up until it got like really bad, but I feel strongly that we should definitely cut it down when all this next snow finishes coming, because I don't think that one can stay anymore, and it is currently dead. Let's see. Oh, about the cell tower and other uses. Just because there are permissible uses doesn't mean that this particular property would fit the bill. I don't think anyone's putting a fairgrounds on 16 acres on Wurtemberg Road. I read briefly today for the special use permits, there's certain uses have special requirements within the special use permit law, and I'm not entirely sure that that property would be able to have a cell tower on it, even if that's something that Barry Sherrod wanted to do. So I appreciate the scare tactics. If I was in their position, I'd do the exact same thing, but I don't necessarily think that all of those apply to this particular parcel. It could be the case for some other project, but I don't think it's this one. Edna, I think you had a comment about invasive species. I don't know how many of you have been to this property, but in between my property and Phil's property, it's like 98% invasive species at this point. And in between Phil's property and the Sherrod property, again, it's all that bittersweet that kills these trees, and I mean, it breaks off limbs. We have one dangling now on a part of our driveway that's just being held up by bittersweet. So I don't know how to fix that, obviously, but it's a problem over there. Oh, about who's responsible for the screening. I know it's been like a long time and it feels like we've had hours of these meetings, but don't forget that contract between Hudson Solar and Barry Sherrod did say that they were going to create, they being Hudson Solar, was going to create a new LLC, and I believe they were going to transfer the lease to the new LLC. So whatever is going on with this lease, if this thing gets approved, with who's responsible for this screening, I think there has to be some clear indication of whether or not Hudson Solar plans on transferring the lease and the farm to some other yet-to-be existed entity. And with the visual impact, I'm going to speak more about that in a second, but I would just say that the visual impact also goes to the economic impact, which is addressed in the law. So I just handed you an email where I told you all that I can see this solar field from my property. I have a half-a-mile long driveway, and as you drive up it, all you have to do is look to the right, and you can see straight through Phil's field, straight into Sherrod's property. So I didn't hear anything back from any of you on that. I didn't hear from Hudson Solar. I didn't hear from Saratoga Associates. Spinzia previously told me that she does not believe the planning board can approve the application if there is any visual impact. The special use permit law states that review by the planning board shall include the visual effect of the proposed installation. The solar law itself says solar power plants and equipment shall be surfaced, designed, and sited so as not to reflect glare on adjacent private properties and public roadways. Eric, you asked Michael at one of these very meetings, what happens if people can see the plant, even with screening? Michael, you responded that you'd have to vote no. The visual impact study, as shoddy as it is, clearly states that there will be a visual impact. The conclusion calls it minor, but that still means that one or more properties will have a view of this power plant, even with screening. The goalpost should not be moved for us. Bottom line is, this power plant will be visible, and therefore, you must vote no. Currently, I can visibly and clearly see the proposed solar field. My view has been exacerbated by the recent storm, which caused some of the previously existing screening to be destroyed. There's an ash tree on my property that was blocking some of the view from a particular angle. As Eric recently stated, there was a disease that killed most, if not all, of the ash trees. I was hoping the ash tree could stay put, but after the storm, it needs to be removed immediately. I believe this ash tree may also be providing screening for Wartenberg Road as well. In addition, Jeff had recently stated that one of the reasons Sherrod's property was attractive to him was because he could site the solar field on a hill so no one could see it. The problem with that is both Phil's property and my property go up a hill. So when you drive up my driveway, it drives up a hill, and when you walk up Phil's property, you're walking up a hill as well. And I think Susan's is the same way, the horse farm. Today, I drove from Wartenberg Road down my driveway, which allowed me a clear view into the property, both through existing vines and shrubs that have no leaves on them, as well as spots that currently have no vegetation, which offer a completely unobstructed view. It seems like one bad storm with heavy snow and winds can wreak havoc on the screening for this project. These storms are only going to get worse. Thus, this recent nor'easter has brought up several questions as it relates to view. One, what happens if a storm destroys the screening put in place on the property? Who is responsible for replacing it? Two, to the extent that the project will rely on screening provided by other properties, what happens if a storm or something else destroys that screening? Is Hudson Solar, someone related to this project, responsible for adding additional screening on obviously their property for the project? What happens when Phil Karate builds his house and he can see the solar field from his second story, the way Mr. Incontrera can now see it from his? Will Hudson Solar be required to add additional screening then? I also do not understand why the visual impact study was limited to adjacent properties when I clearly stated that my property and Susan Sheridan's property can see the solar field. Moreover, there are other issues with the study. I do not understand why I was deprived of the opportunity to have our views assessed. I also don't understand why the study was limited only to adjacent properties when there are clearly more properties that can see this power plant. It also seems extremely sloppy, like it was thrown together with little thought in a relatively short period of time. Saratoga Associates couldn't even be bothered to spell Wartenberg Road properly. I think they spelled it differently each time they wrote it. I've also been unable to give the study the attention it deserves because when your attorney, hi John, sent it to my attorney, pages 2 and 4 of the study were missing. I provided the study to dozens of neighbors, so none of us have had the complete study. I've also walked Phil's property, and it's absurd how close the field will be to his property line. If you are inclined to vote yes on this, which you should not, you should make Hudson Solar move away from that property line. It's only 160 feet. You can see the markers in the trees. You can see the pole they've pounded into the ground. You can see into the field. You can also see all the trash on the property that Barry Sherrod still hasn't cleaned up. Again, we're talking dozens of tires, piles of sheet metal, and trash, and that's only what I can see from Phil's property line. I've been told there's other items buried in the grounds on the property. With respect to the pole that's been pounded into the ground on the Karate property line, one of my questions in my email that was ignored was whether there are any markers on the property to assess the visual impact. I think the pole should have a black piece of plywood or something representing the size and color of the panel. Ideally, you could put a row of mock-ups up along the property line, not necessarily pound the poles in, but put something on the property line. I guess the berm was addressed, but my question was also what happened to it, and were white pines chosen because they are superior to a berm? Also, the visual impact study mentioned waiting 5 years for growth to be adequate for screening. Why do we have to wait 5 years when Hudson Solar can plant fully grown trees? It also seems that recently Jeff has gotten someone from Millbrook and the chief sustainability officer from Bard College to support this project. As far as I know, Bard College is in Red Hook and Millbrook is not Rhinebeck. These people who don't live here or go to Wurtemberg Church should have zero say in what happens in the Rhinebeck community. They don't pay taxes here, we do. To the extent that you're going to consider these letters in support from people outside the community, they should be balanced against the almost complete opposition of every person on Wurtemberg Road, which includes 100% of the adjacent neighbors and all but 5 or 6 Wurtemberg Road residents from the section of Wurtemberg Road that runs from Slate Quarry to Primrose Hill, which is who I believe would be impacted most, whether it was property-wise or otherwise. It should be noted that 2 of the Wurtemberg Road residences who have yet to sign on privately expressed their support but field retaliation from the town. I know tons of people, the vast majority of which do not live in Rhinebeck. Should I have them send in letters opposing the plant? Any person who supports this plant, which, by the way, is very different from stating they have entered into a contract to purchase a share, can currently buy into numerous plants that are up and running that have many shares available. Just based on me inquiring into 2 projects, there's plenty of room in the solar power plant in Wappinger and one in Kingston. They'd be happy to have you folks. Rhinebeck residents do not need to wait for this project on Wurtemberg Road or any other project in Rhinebeck to be started because they can take advantage of the already completed solar power plants on Central Hudson's grid, as well as the 350,000 plus panels worth of solar power plants that are currently being developed on Central Hudson's grid. I was also informed today that BARD, of all places, is doing a study on the effects of solar power plants or solar panels on birds. There's something called lake effect. So birds see a field of solar panels and think it's a body of water and go to dive into said body of water. What they find instead is death. They crash into the solar panels and wind up killing themselves. Anyone who lives on Wurtemberg Road can tell you about the abundance of bird life here. We have so many ponds that birds come back to year after year. I've also brought up to you all before all the Ralph T. Waterman bird clubhouses that are all over Wurtemberg Road. Some solar fields actually have equipment that sprays into the air as supposedly non-lethal bird repellent. To the extent none of you care about bird deaths when they result from solar power plants as opposed to mining, perhaps a condition of any special permit is that Hudson Solar must report deaths of animals over a certain number so the town can require them to do something to mitigate animal deaths due to the solar panels. Finally, none of these studies does anything to rebut the clear showing of adverse impact on all of our property values. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Griffith. I actually live in Red Hook, and I'm hopeful. I paid my deposit to belong to this consortium, and I'm in favor of this proposal. So the neighbors have been within their rights, certainly, to ask for detailed studies of the impacts. But there have been so many mistakes and misunderstandings in the way the project has been characterized that I hardly know where to begin. If anybody told me that a power plant was being built next to my property, I might sign a petition too. The phrase power plant certainly sounds threatening, though I realize that's how it's designated in the zoning code. But to think of this particular project as a major industrial development is a misunderstanding. It's just not on that scale. Part of the misunderstanding has been to compare it to a mining operation, which is in no way comparable to this in terms of noise, traffic, or destruction of the landscape. I want to say something about the charge that was made of a conflict of interest here, and the reason that I want to say that might speak to some of the questions that were asked here by planning board members. This is a statewide endeavor to encourage development of green energy, and this effort has been in the works throughout New York State for a long time. Rhinebeck is in fact behindhand in getting started on it. So these community solar projects are up and running in other parts of the state. So the state is behind this. I don't think that these projects are going to fail. So it made perfect sense for people in the town to come forward to try and get this going here. Let me say something about property values as well. Amanda Miller has speculated that neighbors' property values will be lowered by the project. In fact, she has argued that values will be lowered throughout the entire town, leading to a decrease in tax income, because Rhinebeck's reputation will be spoiled if prospective residents discover that the town allows power plants or mining operations in residential areas. I might speculate exactly the opposite, that enough people would be impressed by a forward-looking town committed to the environmental benefits of small-scale local development of green energy. In fact, after its customary excruciatingly long and thorough consideration of all the issues, the town did not approve the mining operation, which Amanda referred to. Potential buyers who discover the project by researching the area on Google Earth would certainly follow up by investigating the situation on the ground, where they would find that the panels are unobtrusive from the roads and nearby properties that they might be considering. Since I'm from Red Hook, I was going to say something about the value to Rhinebeck versus outside residents. Amanda has argued that the project is of no value to Rhinebeck because membership in this solar farm is open to people outside of Rhinebeck. And that is construing the idea of community pretty narrowly. More than half of the members, or prospective members, live in Rhinebeck, and obviously it will be of value to those citizens. As I said, I live in Red Hook. People in Red Hook and Rhinebeck shop, dine out, attend events in each other's towns, follow each other's political developments, and have collaborated for decades in historic preservation and environmental protection of our beloved Northern Duchess. The project will be of value to the community as a whole by increasing the percentage of clean energy available in the area. Amanda worries that Central Hudson will increase rates as people move to other sources of electricity. And this has been an issue in some parts of the country, particularly in the West. So New York has adopted a regulation to limit the impact on non-participants. The value of energy produced by these community projects can't exceed 2% of a utility's net annual revenue. In addition, members of the solar farm will still pay a basic fee to Central Hudson. Meanwhile, distributed generation saves Central Hudson building new power plants, new centralized power plants, and they'd certainly raise rates if they had to pay for that. So why I like Solar Hudson's business model. It's true that people here can join any project in the Central Hudson region. However, I did look at other options that I happened to hear about first. Some are very small and they appear aimed mainly at a small business neighborhood and they're fully subscribed.